It looked like any other house on the block, quiet, ordinary, just another dot in the suburban sprawl of Norton Shores, Michigan. But inside that home on Marshall Road, something was rotting. Behind drawn curtains and locked doors, a boy was being erased slowly, deliberately by the very people who should have loved him the most. 15-year-old Timothy Ferguson never stood a chance. He didn't die quickly. He died over time, starved, frozen, isolated, and broken down piece by piece until his small, frail body could take no more. And what makes this story so haunting isn't just the cruelty, but who orchestrated it. His mother, Shanda Vander Ark, and his older brother, Paul, didn't just fail Timothy, they engineered his suffering. What began as a custody dispute spiraled into something far darker. When Timothy was sent to live with them in May 2021, he thought he was escaping chaos. Instead, he was stepping into a nightmare meticulously crafted by the people who shared his blood. For 14 straight months, Timothy endured a regime of starvation and sadism. Denied food for days, then punished violently when he tried to eat, sometimes even forced to vomit it back up by hands that should have held him. He was autistic, ADHD positive, and developmentally delayed. He needed help. Instead, he got surveillance cameras in every corner, alarms, motion sensors, restrictions that turned a family home into a private prison. When emergency services finally found Timothy's body in the summer of 2022, they described a scene straight from a horror film. He had withered away to just 69 pounds. The cause of death? Malnutrition and hypothermia. He died hungry. He died cold. He died alone. And yet the darkness goes deeper. This wasn't a moment of madness. It was a campaign, a mother's cold detachment, a brother's violent obedience, a system of control so intense it bordered on psychological warfare. How does a family get here? How does a mother design the destruction of her own child? Today on True Crimes. By Dominic, we're unraveling one of the most shocking and tragic cases of familial abuse in recent history, not just for the brutality, but for the complete collapse of empathy within the walls of a home. As we dig deeper into the lives of Shanda, Paul, and the secrets buried inside the walls of that house, I want you to ask yourself, was this the result of mental illness, manipulation, or something far more monstrous? Leave a comment below and tell me, do you believe evil is born or built? And if you haven't already, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a case that shakes the very foundation of what we think we know about family and trust. Now, let's go back to where this horror began and follow the trail of red flags that everyone ignored. When Timothy Ferguson was placed in the care of his mother, Shanda Vander Ark, it was supposed to be a fresh start, a safe space after a turbulent time living with his biological father. But that hope would be brutally short-lived, because what should have been a second chance at stability quickly devolved into something almost impossible to comprehend. A calculated, methodical descent into abuse that spanned over 14 months. During that time, 19-year-old Paul Ferguson, Timothy's own brother, became more than just a bystander. He became an accomplice, a full-fledged enforcer of his mother's cruelty. Together, they created a household where Timothy, a boy with autism, ADHD, and significant motor skill delays, was no longer treated like a member of the family, but as a problem to be controlled, a nuisance to be dominated, a presence to be erased. Despite his diagnoses and special needs, despite his obvious vulnerabilities and his dependence on others for structure and care, Timothy was denied even the most basic human needs. Food became a weapon. He was intentionally starved, not for days, but for weeks at a time, subjected to long stretches where the fridge and pantry were locked, and he was left to wither in silence. And if he dared to sneak so much as a bite, if his body desperate, starving, tried to survive, that simple act of hunger was treated like betrayal. The punishment? Brutal. Shanda and Paul forced him to vomit up whatever he had eaten. Fingers were shoved down his throat to make sure nothing stayed in his system, not even scraps. This wasn't just starvation. It was control, a systematic effort to break him. Inside that home, nothing Timothy did went unnoticed. Cameras watched his every step. Motion sensors buzzed if he moved wrong. Alarms were triggered just by opening a door. It was like a prison, except this wasn't built for criminals. It was designed for one boy, a child. And the guards? His own family. Timothy was under surveillance 24/7. The system wasn't just for security, it was for punishment. It was how Shanda ensured she could monitor and micromanage every flicker of defiance, every breath of disobedience. If he moved, she knew. If he breathed too loud, she knew. And all of it, every camera, every lock, every alarm was used to justify more abuse. Eventually, Timothy's body began to show the cost of what he was enduring. His weight dropped drastically. His strength faded. And still, no one intervened. Then in the quiet neighborhood of Norton Shores, Michigan, the horror finally came to light. Authorities were called to the family's home, where they found Timothy, just 15 years old, dead. His body showed clear signs of prolonged suffering. The medical examiner determined the cause of death: malnutrition and hypothermia. Yes, Timothy died from a combination of starvation and cold in a house full of people, under the watch of his own family. News of the tragedy sent shockwaves through the community. Local media described it as one of the most disturbing cases they'd seen. And when Shanda Vander Ark finally appeared in court, facing charges of murder and child abuse, seasoned investigators struggled to hold back emotion. One official who had worked over 2 decades in the justice system said it plainly: "I've seen horror walk through our doors every day, but this is one of the most sadistic and heartbreaking things I've ever encountered." To truly grasp the weight of this story, we have to look back at the people, the dynamics, the breakdown of compassion. Shanda Vander Ark was 41 when she was arrested. She had moved from Oklahoma to Michigan, eventually settling down with her second husband, Adam Vander Ark. Together they raised 3 children: Paul, the oldest, 19 at the time of Timothy's death; Timothy, the middle child, just 15, and their youngest, known only as G, who was just 7 years old during these events. Paul and Timothy were both children from Shanda's previous marriage. G was the only child she shared with Adam. From the outside, the family seemed ordinary enough. They blended into their suburban surroundings like any other. But behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding, one that revealed cracks, dysfunction, and an escalating sense of control and cruelty. Timothy's special needs meant that he needed patience, structure, and above all, care. But instead of receiving that, he became a scapegoat, a target, a victim of what seemed like growing resentment and dehumanization from the very people who were supposed to protect him. Things took a sharp turn in January 2022. That's when Adam, the stepfather, suffered a serious stroke. He was forced to move out and live with his own parents to recover. And with Adam gone, whatever semblance of balance the household had left disappeared completely. Now it was just Shanda, Paul, Timothy, and little G. And what followed in the months after Adam's departure was nothing short of a nightmare. The abuse wasn't sudden, it escalated. Quietly at first, missed meals, harsh words, but soon it grew darker, more deliberate, more sadistic. Timothy was isolated, deprived, watched like a prisoner. His cries were ignored, his hunger was punished, and his body, a body that was already vulnerable due to his medical and neurological conditions, simply couldn't endure it. With Adam gone, the one steady adult presence in the home, everything changed. Now it was just Shanda, Paul, Timothy, and Timothy's 7-year-old little brother, G. And without Adam's calming influence, the situation quickly unraveled. What began as control slowly curdled into cruelty. And what followed was something far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. At first, it seemed like Timothy was simply seen as a difficult child. But instead of seeking help or understanding him, Shanda and Paul responded with escalating violence and sadistic punishments. Investigators later uncovered a lengthy chain of text messages exchanged between the two, a digital paper trail that reads more like a horror story than anything else. Each message revealing how methodical and increasingly brutal their treatment of Timothy had become. Shanda didn't just allow the abuse, she orchestrated it. She sent Paul step-by-step instructions on how to discipline her teenage son. But this wasn't grounding him or taking away electronics. This was something darker, something twisted. The The messages show her advising Paul to punish Timothy with things that bordered on torture, beginning with food restrictions and spiraling into torment. Timothy was regularly denied meals, and when he was fed, it was often nothing more than slices of bread soaked in painfully hot sauces. Not just any sauces either. Shanda specifically ordered bottles of the spiciest blends she could find, brands with names like Elijah's Extreme Regret. She searched them out with a disturbing sense of purpose, like she was hunting down the ingredients for a recipe of suffering. And then in a message that sent shivers down the spines of the investigators reading it, Shanda casually suggested using the hot sauce on Timothy's genitals, as if it were just another option in her growing list of punishments. During questioning, she was confronted directly. "So, you wouldn't use hot sauce to punish a dog, but you were okay using it on a 14-year-old child?" Shanda responded with something that's haunted many ever since. "It was Paul's idea. But yes, I was at my wit's end." Her tone disturbingly detached. No shock, no remorse. She was reminded of the dozens of texts where she told Paul things like, "Put more hot sauce on the bread," or "Make sure he eats all 4 slices." When asked if she remembered them, she said, "Some of them, not very many." The home Timothy entered in May of 2021 was one that quickly turned from unstable to unlivable. At the time, the household included just Shanda, Paul, 7-year-old G, and Shanda's partner, Adam. But when Adam suffered a massive stroke in January of 2022, everything fell apart. The house, once tense, became a pressure cooker. Shortly after Adam's stroke, Paul admitted that Shanda involved him directly in punishing Timothy, and one of the first things she ordered, locking away all access to food. Shanda claimed Timothy was sneaking food he didn't need, so she put locks on the fridge, freezer, and pantry. In other words, if Timothy was hungry, it was now a crime. There were whispers of hunger strikes, rumors that Timothy had stopped eating after Adam's stroke, or in the weeks leading to his death. But when asked under oath, Paul confirmed, none of that ever happened. Timothy didn't refuse food, he was denied it. And yet Shanda's punishments kept escalating. She ordered Paul to feed Timothy the now infamous hot sauce bread, forcing him to stand near the back door of the kitchen and watch him eat every painful bite. Did it ever look like he wanted to eat it? The question came. Paul's answer? No. But the bread wasn't the only way they used the hot sauce. Sometimes, Paul admitted, they'd pour it directly into Timothy's mouth. Other times they'd make him eat it off a spoon, all under Shanda's direction. And then came the closet. Deep in the basement of their home, Timothy was regularly confined to a small, pitch-black closet. No light, no bedding. Just a threadbare tarp on the floor and an old Amazon box. The air inside reeked of urine and feces. There was no bathroom access, and there were no breaks. To keep him trapped, Shanda and Paul used alarms, zip ties, even handcuffs. This wasn't discipline. This was imprisonment. Shanda didn't stop at starvation and confinement. She wanted control over everything. She instructed Paul to put Timothy through physically agonizing punishments, making him squat or stand facing a wall for hours, unmoving. Paul once admitted to chasing the frail boy up and down the stairs as a form of exercise, ignoring the fact that Timothy's body was already wasting away. One of the most chilling text exchanges reveals Shanda's cold calculation. She told Paul to heat up frozen pizza rolls until their smell filled the air just enough to tempt Timothy. Then hold them near his face. Let him inhale it. Let him think maybe, just maybe, he'd be allowed to eat. But the second he showed interest, yank them away. The only way he could get food was to obey a list of demands. Hunger used as leverage. Food turned into a weapon. It got worse. One day, Timothy was caught doing something that no child should ever have to do. He ate part of a discarded hamburger bun he'd found in the trash. When Paul told Shanda what had happened, her response was cold and immediate. Make him throw it up. And he did. Paul described the moment in court, said he stuck his fingers down to Timothy's throat, just as Shanda had told him to, for eating the crust of a burger bun. By now, Timothy's condition had severely deteriorated. And then, came the final day. Paul was asked, "Do you remember the day before your brother passed away?" His answer was quiet. "I was told to wake him up, but he was unresponsive." At some point, the abuse stopped being about punishment. It stopped being about control. It became cruelty, pure and simple. The kind that doesn't happen in a moment of anger. It happens through planning, through neglect, through the horrifying belief that child suffering is deserved. And in Timothy's final days, even that wasn't enough to save him. By the final day of Timothy Ferguson's life, the house he lived in had transformed into something far from a home. It was a cage, and inside that cage, Timothy, a 15-year-old boy with special needs, was barely clinging to life. Paul, his older brother, was tasked with waking him up that morning. But this wasn't just any ordinary morning. The cameras inside the house, always rolling, always watching, had already been activated. Everything that happened was being monitored remotely by their mother, Shanda Vander Ark. And this morning, something was very wrong. Paul approached the closet. That's where Timothy had been forced to sleep. And when he tried to wake him, Timothy didn't respond. Not to shouting, not to shaking. He just lay there, still. It wasn't the first time Timothy had been unresponsive, but this time was different. He wouldn't open his eyes. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even sit up on his own. Paul admitted later that he had to drag his little brother from the closet to the bathroom. Timothy's body was limp. He couldn't stand. He couldn't walk. He was fading. And yet the response from Shanda, watching all of this unfold from a distance, was not panic or concern. It wasn't a mother's fear for her dying child. It was cold. It was clinical. She told Paul what to do next. Put him in an ice bath. So Paul did. He lowered his brother's near unconscious body into a tub of freezing water. The time, based on later texts, was around 2 p.m., and from that moment until about 6 p.m., Paul stayed home with Timothy, his body submerged in cold water, waiting for their mother to return so she could drive him to work. 4 long hours. 4 hours in an ice bath. For a boy who could barely lift his head. But it gets worse. Even while Timothy sat freezing in that tub, Shanda was texting Paul instructions. Not about saving him, not about checking his breathing. No, she told Paul to make him uncomfortable. And then she came up with a sick test. She told Paul to heat up a pizza roll and hold it in front of Timothy to see if he would react, to see if the food would draw any sign of life. And if he responded, Paul was to pull it away. He did exactly that. He heated the food, held it close, and when Timothy, weak and starving, made a feeble attempt to reach for it, Paul snatched it back as ordered. Imagine that for a moment. Your little brother, cold, shaking, possibly dying, and you're being told to tease him with food, not feed him, tease him. That's what Timothy endured. And over the months leading up to this point, his condition had been visibly deteriorating. He was wasting away. His body was bones and skin. Paul had even started sending photos of Timothy's alarming weight loss to their mother, hoping, maybe just hoping, that she'd finally snap out of it and realize what was happening. One photo, taken on June 13th, showed Timothy's emaciated frame. Paul sent it to Shanda with a message that should have sent any parent into a panic. Timothy tried to sneak food. I yelled at him and he became momentarily unresponsive. He's bone thin, Mama. I think we actually need to feed him. But Shanda's reply wasn't a cry of concern. It wasn't shock. It wasn't empathy. It was flat, mechanical. Kay, give him bread. Maybe peanut butter sandwiches and water. No suggestion of real food. No care. No urgency. Just bread. Bread and peanut butter. When pressed in court later, Shanda claimed she didn't remember seeing the photo, but the text told another story. She had written, I see what you mean, in response to that very picture. So why deny it? Why pretend she hadn't seen her son reduced to a shell of himself? And more than that, why continue punishing him? Shanda wasn't just restricting his food. She went further. She began using hot sauce as a form of punishment, smeared onto bread to make even small scraps unbearable to eat. But this wasn't just any hot sauce. She admitted to going out of her way to special order hotter and hotter brands from Amazon because the mild ones, the ones easily available at local stores, weren't punishing enough. Timothy liked those, and liking them, in Shanda's mind, meant they weren't useful. So she escalated. The bread stayed, the peanut butter stayed, but they were now weapons, coated in scorching sauces meant to burn rather than nourish. Timothy was also forced into physical punishments. Wall sits, running up and down the stairs, sometimes while it was raining or freezing outside. Shanda herself sent texts instructing Paul to make him do it repeatedly, no matter the weather. Even when Timothy could barely stand. And then came the most haunting part. During one moment, while Timothy was submerged in that ice bath, dying, Shanda sent Paul a message. She was watching the cameras from work, and what she wrote was this: "I wonder how it would feel to have that hot sauce on your private parts. Not touching there, not at all, but dripping a little bit. Let that sink in. A child, a dying boy, sitting in ice water, and his mother is texting about ways to escalate the punishment." By 4:25 that afternoon, Timothy had been in that ice bath for over 2 hours. He was unresponsive. His body was giving up. And still she watched. Still, she texted. Still, she did nothing to save him. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was orchestrated cruelty, and it was deliberate. It was the morning of July 6, 2022, the day everything would finally come to light. Shanda Vander Ark dialed 911. Her voice was flat, emotionless, as she reported that her 15-year-old son Timothy was unresponsive. She didn't sound panicked. She didn't sound devastated. Instead, she offered a simple explanation. Timothy, she claimed, had been refusing to eat. A hunger strike, she said. Voluntary. But when paramedics stepped into that Norton Shores home, the lie unraveled almost instantly. Timothy's body told a very different story. He weighed just 69 pounds, half of what a teenage boy his age should have weighed. His frail frame was a roadmap of suffering, every rib and joint protruding beneath his pale, cold skin. His lips were cracked, his fingers blue, his eyes hollow. It didn't take long for the truth to rise. According to the medical examiner, Timothy didn't just starve. He died from a brutal trio of causes: malnutrition, dehydration, and hypothermia. And the most haunting detail? In the days before his death, Timothy had been subjected to repeated ice baths forced into freezing water as punishment for minor infractions, real or imagined. His body simply shut down. And still, the cruelty didn't stop there. Investigators quickly began combing through Shanda's phone and the network of home surveillance she'd installed. What they found was beyond disturbing, a digital trail of torment, filmed and saved, proof of what Timothy had endured in his final hours. One video in particular chilled detectives to the core. In it, Shanda can be seen dragging Timothy's limp, near-lifeless body across the house. He's not screaming. He's not even resisting. He can't. His body is too weak. She pulls him into a dark basement closet, a cramped, cold space with no bedding, no comfort, just bare floor, and dumps him inside. As she closes the door behind her, she spits venom at him, calls him pathetic. Useless. 15 minutes pass. Then she returns. Timothy is still alive, but barely. His body is convulsing. He's trembling, struggling to breathe. His muscles twitch with the last of his strength. But instead of helping, Shanda crouches beside him and grips his face, accusing him of faking it. "You're being dramatic," she snaps. And then, nothing. No call for help, no ambulance, no compassion, just silence. Timothy died in that basement closet sometime in the night, alone, in the dark, on the floor, a child robbed of not just life, but dignity. The next morning, it was Paul, Timothy's older brother, who discovered the body. He went straight to his mother. Her response? Not horror, not grief, just logistics, cover-up, damage control. Together, they dressed Timothy's lifeless body. They repositioned him, cleaned up just enough to make their story more believable. And when questioned, they clung tightly to the lie that Timothy had chosen this, that he had simply refused to eat. But the evidence was overwhelming. And what began as a suspicious death quickly evolved into a full-blown homicide investigation. As detectives continued their work, they uncovered a long, disturbing history that painted the picture of a mother who had been moving state to state Oklahoma, then Michigan, seemingly one step ahead of Child Protective Services. There had been reports, there had been red flags, but somehow the system failed to catch her, to stop her, to save him. This wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't a sudden breakdown. It was the grim conclusion of years of abuse. A pattern. A slow-burn nightmare hidden behind the walls of an ordinary-looking house. When the trial finally began, the courtroom filled with heavy silence as the details of Timothy's final months were laid bare. Witnesses described him as skeletal, broken. One even said it reminded them of a demented version of Harry Potter because of how gaunt and frail he looked. Bones jutting through skin, sunken eyes. A boy long forgotten by the world around him. The prosecution didn't have to embellish. The footage alone, the recordings from inside the house, showed a home ruled by fear. A mother obsessed with domination. A brother twisted into her accomplice. But Paul's role? That was more complicated. Yes, the evidence showed Paul had physically harmed Timothy. He'd enforced many of the punishments. He dragged him back into that closet more than once. But Paul's defense argued that he too was a victim molded and manipulated by Shanda from a young age. He wasn't just following orders. He was desperately trying to win his mother's love, trying not to become the next target. During his testimony, Paul admitted that he had a warped view of Shanda. He described it like Stockholm Syndrome, the psychological phenomenon where captives grow attached to their captors. He said, "I needed her to be proud of me. I needed a role model. My self-esteem was nothing. I would do anything to not disappoint her." And that's exactly what he did, anything. In court, Shanda tried to play the victim. She claimed Paul came up with some of the punishments, including the idea of using hot sauce on Timothy's private areas, a method of pain and humiliation. She argued that it wasn't her plan, that Timothy liked spicy food, that she was just doing what she thought might work. Her voice lacked remorse. Her words felt hollow. When confronted with photos Paul had sent her images of Timothy, starving and emaciated, she didn't express guilt. Instead, she insisted Timothy was faking it, that he just needed to get back on the track, back to the routine. The jury didn't buy it. After hearing all the evidence, the videos, the texts, the testimony, it took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty of felony murder. Guilty of first-degree child abuse. And the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 50 to 100 years for the child abuse conviction. Justice was swift, but justice doesn't bring Timothy back. As for Paul, now 21 years old, he was sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison. The judge noted that Paul still showed signs of emotional detachment, warning that unless treated, he remained a risk to society. A young man now facing a lifetime of reckoning behind bars. In the end, this case wasn't just about the brutality of a single mother, but about the failure of every system that was supposed to protect Timothy. A vulnerable child, crying out in silence, in a house wired with cameras, not for his safety, but for his control. And no one came in time. Timothy Ferguson's story isn't just about the cruelty he endured. It's about how suffering can hide in plain sight behind closed doors, in quiet neighborhoods, in homes where no one thinks to look. It's about the systems that failed him, the people who didn't ask questions, and a child who kept waking up every day in a world that seemed to forget he existed. He was 15. He should have been riding bikes with friends, complaining about homework, dreaming about his future. Instead, he was counting down his final moments in a dark basement closet, punished for simply being a child. And now 2 lives are behind bars, but 1 life is gone forever. This story forces us to ask hard questions, not just about monsters, but about apathy. How many more Timothys are out there right now, unseen, unheard, and slowly fading away? And if the people meant to protect them keep looking the other way. Who will step in? Let me know in the comments what you think. Was Paul a victim or just another abuser? And do you believe the justice system did enough? Or was this too little, too late? Your thoughts matter, not just for the algorithm, but for the truth. If this story moved you, unsettled you, or made you think twice about the people around you, share it. Someone might need to hear it. Make sure you're subscribed to True Crimes by Dominic, where we tell these stories not just to expose the darkness, but to make sure it's never forgotten. New cases drop every 2 days, real stories, real lives, no sensationalism, just the raw human truth. And don't forget to hit the bell icon. It's the only way to know when the next story goes live. Because some stories deserve to be heard, and some victims deserve to be remembered. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and never stop asking, what really happened behind those closed doors? This is True Crimes by Dominic. Thanks for watching.